So, Ben, how you doing, man?
I'm good. Yeah. You?
Good.
Yeah.
Welcome over here in Portugal.
Yeah.
I'm. Well, if people don't know, like people that are watching or listening in, I'm Oli Russell-Cowan. I'm the co-founder and captain of Cult Indoctrination at Uncharted Territories. I'm here with Ben Dando, co-founder, Admiral of the fleet, we call him.
Yep.
How you feeling, man? How you doing?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's nice to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, bro.
Yeah, good man. And we are. I guess there's been a lot of talk on the internet over the last couple of months about a company that we used to work with, Liquid Death, and you were overseeing. You were looking after international, essentially, right? You were managing director of international. I was in charge of lifestyle marketing and sort of the global, marketing, lifestyle marketing director. Between us, you started maybe about 8 months earlier than I did. And a lot of people would be interested to know, like, what happened back then. And we can kind of have this honest chat about it now, that things are sort of have wrapped up. And I'd love to, firstly, if that's cool with you, sort of jump back into, how the journey began with Liquid Death, and just get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, man, sounds good. Well, listen, I guess firstly I'll go back a step before that and just give a bit of background and experience on me.
Great.
I've been in food and beverage for about 20 years, so technically a veteran of the industry, and worked for some pretty big brands, so the likes of Coca-Cola, Red Bull, Danone, which is a big French company. And then sort of as my career progressed, I started working for like smaller, sustainability-driven, plant-based businesses, organic, fair trade brands that were like disruptive, but trying to do things for the better, for good. And then as that career progressed, I found sort of my niche was actually smaller brands that are really disruptive, that are looking to do something brilliant. And I found that worked really well for me. So I was actually chief executive of a business called Karma Drinks at the time, and that role was coming to the end as we were going through a potential acquisition. So some of the guys that I used to work with at a brand called Calafia Farms, which is a big US company, and I launched that brand into the UK, and it's now the third or fourth largest dairy old brand and still very successful in the UK business. So they'd moved across to Liquid Death, and they were like, hey, we've got this guy who's great at launching brands internationally. Let's bring him into Liquid Death. So the very start of it was connections from conversations with previous people that I work with. And they said, hey, can you come across and work as a consultant and advise us on our global expansion? So I was pretty busy going through a potential acquisition and consulting for Liquid Death at the time and building out this international strategy. So we sort of pulled together a plan to go, okay, what was the objective? Why were we launching Liquid Death internationally? And it was a really simple remit. It was, how do we get proof of concept in new markets and grow valuation of the business? Very, very simply. So we started looking at which markets had sizable categories that we could go into. We looked at which markets we felt that brand could resonate. We looked at like supply chains and infrastructure and created effectively what is the plan? What is the plan to take Liquid Death international?
And this was all on your own, like at the beginning, right? This is kind of before we had that team.
Before we had a team, before we created a team, So we obviously people in the US, the existing team in the US, and it was our CFO and our CEO and our COO, and it was a cross-functional team, of pretty senior people that were going, okay, if we're going to take this brand internationally, where, why, how, who, which products, all that sort of stuff. And it was so much fun, man. It was so much fun. I absolutely loved it. Still today, one of the best jobs I've ever done, in my life. Meteoric rise with lots of things, and an interesting conclusion to the international side of the business. But it was fantastic. And a lot of what we did, I guess we'll talk through today, is there's lots of things that were very successful. There's also some incredible learnings in there for any brand that looks to go international. And how do you do that in a way where you can potentially learn from some of these things from Liquid Death, but not just Liquid Death. Like, I've got some great experience with other brands now, and I've done this multiple times. So there's some really good learnings in there to make sure that it's successful.
And I'd love to talk about a bit later on, like the lessons learned, but that initial kind of setup of Liquid Death, and like why we did that, or like why you chose to kind of like do, say, the UK first. This is sort of going back in 2022, right? So when that started, and how did you feel about the brand getting that massive in the States and going, okay, like how are we going to do this globally?
Yeah.
And like what sort of pressure you feeling, like, you know, because then, I mean, it wasn't like 10 million followers, and it wasn't like they had investment, but it wasn't, you know, what it came to be.
Yeah.
You know, like now a 1.4 billion valuation, that was kind of like in the build up to all of that, right?
Yeah. And just, I guess, just on that valuation, going back to that initial objective, it was, I think we were rallied around about $250 million at the time.
Yeah.
So by the time you and I finished working at Liquid Death, it was valued at 1.4 billion. So did we get proof of concept in markets that the brand was working? Yeah, we did. And did we grow valuation? Yeah, we did. Yeah. So like incredibly proud of like the team and everybody at Liquid Death for doing that, and our partners as well. But there's so many things that we could talk about with Liquid Death. I don't know where you want to take it, really.
I mean, I guess so people that have followed the brand, everyone knows it for its like disruptive, viral marketing, that nature of it, and those components. I mean, yeah, and that's something that obviously is the sexy side of it. You know, like how the goal, I mean, I know with the goal, like the team that I was working on over in the US, they were like, okay, how are they going to break the internet that day that they launch a new piece of content, a new campaign?
Yeah.
And that was it. But then there's so many other moving parts to it. And yeah, I mean, how did you find that kind of, just overseeing all these areas? It's not just the, you know, what people see and and the content that's kind of been generated, and the fun partnerships and stuff like that. It's everything else, right?
Yeah, I think with a brand like Liquid Death, there's incredibly high expectations. High expectations. There was a decent level of autonomy, but there was a high delivery expectation from that as well, as there should be for a successful brand that's growing and scaling with brilliant people, and a brand that really is disruptive and stands out. So I think you asked a little bit earlier about the pressure. So like an immense amount of pressure to do that. And at this point in time, I think I was living in New Zealand, you know, trying to set up a UK entity. And we went into a few other markets as well, working with a US business. So working some very strange hours. So some very strange hours, pulling together the whole infrastructure. And this is what probably lots of, you know, people don't see, is everything that happens in the background.
Yeah.
It's the capital raising, it's the liquid development, it's the supply chain setup, it's the, you know, the HR and the team build, and the systems, processes, tools, you know, buying web domains. I mean, you know, there's so much that goes into taking a brand internationally. So I think that initial stage was around a cross-functional working, bringing together some great people, and just going, right, what are all the things that we need to do in order to get this business to land and launch successfully in these markets?
Yeah.
And there was a lot, and we used various project tools to, you know, manage that infrastructure. But for a long period of time, it was just me, until we then had access to that budget to then bring other people into the business. And then that's when it gets fun, not funny, because you're close to launch and you're excited, and all the work that you've done is getting ready to get out there into the market.
Yeah.
So that stuff is definitely more enjoyable than the prelim part. But the prelim part is critical to get it right. So when you do launch, you launch successfully.
Yeah.
Which we did. I mean, we, you know, take the UK as an example, we got the Grocer product launch of the year, you know, against any brand and business, you know, in multiple categories, which is quite an accolade to get. So I was really proud of all the work that everybody did around that launch. But there's definitely, when you're trying to scale and go at speed, there's some things that you can do that maybe, you know, aren't perfect as well, which is so valuable to make sure that those things you learn from, I guess.
Yeah. And with all that build up leading to launch, and then, you know, we were going into like multiple festivals, like it was like 100 plus festivals that were out, something, like in the UK. It was wild. Are there any moments for you that kind of stand out as like, that you were super proud of that we achieved, like in doing that, like in that run up?
Yeah. Proudest moments. Oh, I think like I was really proud of the team, like, and what everybody delivered. Like, I think there was, like I say, high expectations, high delivery.
Yeah.
And actually the team and culture that we had for a long period of time was just phenomenal. So I'd say that was one of the key highlights. But working on a brand that's that creative and uses that creative license to get cut through in the market through any form of marketing communications is just so much fun.
Yeah.
When you see, and a lot of the content was delivered out of the US. And our job really was to try and sort of use that content and generate as much awareness as we could to drive that engagement. And like, it was so much fun because that level of creativity, when you're at brands that are quite corporate and quite straight down the line, it's, a fairly generic playbook. And I think Liquid Death at that time just ripped up the rule book and said, you know what, we're going to do this totally differently.
Yeah.
And it is just, it's creative and it's fun and it's wild. And there's, we remember we were, I don't know, we had a partnership with Live Nation, which, take one of the learnings, incredible partnership, also an investor in Liquid Death. And that partnership then meant that we were going to 40 odd festivals just in the UK, let alone, globally, getting cans in hands and people interacting with the brand. So our awareness was skyrocketing very, very quickly through a very successful partnership. But then we also had some amazing times as a team. Like, you and I saw Metallica together, like in
the snake pit. Right? Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yeah. Like, just so it was incredible experiences. But we're working very hard to deliver against that as well.
Yeah. And I'm like what you said of like it being, a little bit disruptive within the industry. I mean, like one of the moments I remember, like speaking at the UK soft drinks conference, and I was wearing, I think I had like a pink Hawaiian shirt with axes and chainsaws on it, like a Liquid Death shirt, and the host, the moderator of the conference, he just taps me on the shoulder and goes, "Oliver, my dear boy, you're not really going to be wearing that on stage, are you?" I was like, "Well, this is Liquid Death. This is what it's about." And that's like, and that kind of, for me, just summed it up, that we were kind of doing something that was different, but it was super fun, and it felt genuine to be a part of that because of the sort of the communities that we were engaged with, or the things that we were doing.
Yeah,
that was the lifestyle of the brand.
Yeah.
How was it then? Kind of like, how did you find it? We had this like timeline of when we were going to go into all these new markets. And that was like, now looking back, it was nuts, right? I mean,
yeah, it was a lot and quickly. Yeah.
Like commuting from New Zealand, and I was sort of like, then I was like dropped into all these different countries and places.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I think so we tried, when we initially scoped out where we were going to go, we looked at like category size, follower demographic through social media, where did we have good partnerships, where do we feel like we could get reasonable distribution, how could we localize brand, there's certain metrics that we looked at to go, that becomes a tier 1 market opportunity for us.
Yeah.
And there were some markets that we picked as part of that we didn't go into in the end because it was just too difficult, like Germany being a prime example. Complicated with some regulatory elements, which overcomplicated supply chains. The category was huge, a massive category, but incredibly price driven. So if you're already a commoditized product and you're trying to premiumize a commoditized category, and you've added in layers and layers of complexity, margins are tight, it's a volume play. Mm-hmm. So on face value, it looks like a great opportunity. Then when you scrape through the surface, you go, actually, maybe this is just too difficult to do, and making money and commercializing that over time becomes very tricky.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of where we chose not to do something when we thought we were going to. And then there were other markets that we did go into, and actually I'd say probably one of our most successful markets was the Australian market. And I think it was successful for a range of reasons. We had, I think if you look at the brand itself, Liquid Death, obviously incredibly creative that we've spoken about, but its humour can be quite brash and quite in your face. And that seemed to resonate more with the Australian,
with the Aussies, right?
yeah, the Aussie audience, and they kind of got it more and quicker.
Yeah.
So that worked incredibly well. We had a really fantastic distribution partner, and that distribution partner was great at unlocking things like earned media through the content that was being created. We had lifestyle marketing teams that were in place over there. We had access to customers and distribution. We had the right distribution players and brand build over time. And actually the level of growth we were seeing in the Australian market by the time that the international side of the business finished up was actually larger than most other markets. It was, it was a fantastic success, and worked really well. Equally, there's some things that I just think brands can learn from. So localized content, how do you make content relevant for local markets when you're expanding internationally is just such an important asset for different brands. So, a celebrity endorsement or a comedian that is known in one market but not known in another, it just doesn't cut through as much.
Yeah.
So I think that localization is an important part, and how you localize a brand when you're going into these new markets as well.
I mean, I remember when we were kind of doing some of these campaigns, and we would use, say, a particular celebrity that was super famous in the US, but in the UK or outside, we were like,
yeah.
You'd look around the office and be like, I don't want to say I don't know who this person is, but it's like, we don't, it's not going to hit locally, right?
Yeah.
Like, it just won't. So it's like, if you're going to go into these, like, say, Germany or France, wherever it may be, or UAE, it's got to be with people that are relevant there. If they're global, amazing. That's the ultimate.
Yeah.
But it's got to be both sides of the pond, right?
I think so. Yeah. And I think that was one of the biggest learnings for the UK.
Yeah.
There were sort of time and time again that actually content that was being put out just wasn't relevant. So you leverage that through things like earned media.
Yeah.
But actually it's very difficult. It's very difficult to leverage some of that as much as you can do. So I think it's a really important lesson for people to learn and brands to learn. Yeah.
I mean, there's so much nut stuff. Did you have a favorite campaign of like what they would do?
I mean, it's just, I mean, to be honest, there's so many, like.
Which is rare. I mean, when you sometimes you think about what a brand, say, and you just remember them for one, like Guinness or like Heineken, whoever it may be, or Pepsi or whatever. It's like, it'd be one specific thing.
Yeah.
You don't remember them for like multiple, like.
Correct. Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And
different marketing campaigns, right?
Yeah. And I think that level of creativity was just insane. Steve-O's Voodoo Doll campaign, like ridiculous, hilarious. Like what the hell was that about? And taking Tony Hawk's blood and putting it into a skateboard. I mean, these things have just never been done.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the thing that was most impressive. It was just rewriting that rule book.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I wouldn't say there's one favourite, but there was just so many, and that's credit to the creative team, that pull those things together.
And it was good to test. Like, that was one thing I was like really enjoyed, was testing people's like opinions or like level of comfort with that. When you show them a video and they're like, oh, are they going to find this funny? They're just going to go quiet, like what are they going to do? And you think one thing would hit, say, if you were doing a retailer presentation or, like a particular customer or in a conference or a keynote, and then you do another video and they're like, yeah, everyone laughs. You're like, oh, I didn't think that one was going to, like, you really don't know. And then that just depends on like where you are and who you're with, right?
Yeah.
And what things did you think there were similar between like your experience, your previous roles? So like Karma, Califia Farms, I mean, you're at Coke, you're Red Bull. Yeah. How, like, all those, like, sort of all the years leading up to Liquid Death, what was the similarities, would you say, and then obviously what were the big differences?
I think similarities, so lots of the brands that you referenced there are beverage brands, so taking that industry experience across supply chain, operations, finance, brand, commercial, team, markets, channels, all that sort of stuff. You build experience over time, which then you can use that experience to like make informed decisions and make the right decisions. So there's lots of similarities when you've worked in multiple beverage companies that you can apply to when you launch something new.
Yeah.
I think like the difference in some of those, so if you take like the Cokes and the Red Bulls of the world, you know, quite like very sophisticated in terms of how they approach, you know, brand, very, I don't know, like very, I want to say strict, but it's maybe not quite the right word, but like they've got a way of doing things and they religiously stick to that, you know, time and time again.
Almost like regulated, right, in a way.
Totally, yeah. There's not the amount of creative freedom, you know, across the organisation.
Yeah.
You know, operationally, they're so sound and set up, and it's going to, you know, move very, very little, you know. From a creative campaign, they've got very clear direction and guidelines that you have to follow. You know, if you're putting a piece of point of sale out there, there's a logo that can't be this big, it has to be this big, and it can't be in this place, it has to be in this place. You know, it's very, like, it's very regulated. So with that comes consistency in communication and message, but with that also comes constraints.
Yeah.
And those constraints then stop you actually doing something that could be quite spectacular and cut through. So, you know, one of the mantras at Liquid Death was like, how do you thumb stop in content, wasn't it? Like, how do you create content that people just go, oh, hang on, what was that? I'm going to go back and have a look at that. And it's very social first, you know, and incredible, the level of following through and engagement through Liquid Death social, you know, platforms was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that wanted to write about Liquid Death's campaigns, just everyone was writing about Liquid Death all the time. So I think the stat in the UK was we went from like 0 to like 20% awareness in 18 months, which as any brand is huge. And your traditional marketing funnel is to grow awareness, you know, consideration, purchase, intent, you know, advocacy, and you refeed the funnel.
Yeah.
And you're trying to really go from both ends. You're trying to like find your core audience, which we'll talk about in a second, and you're trying to grow awareness of brand. And if you can filter both ways, you end up getting more people buying into your brand in the first place, and consistently doing that time and time again. So, yeah, those like brands like Liquid Death, you know, there's less constraints. You know, Karma, we had some constraints with what we did, but you know, actually quite often there it was just limited spend. So there's so much you know you can do. Calafia Farms, it was more about like actually a category need. You know, and I'll touch upon this in a second, but you know, providing a solution for a consumer that is lactose intolerant, there is a need for that type of product. So, but just a couple of geese out there.
Portugal,
yeah,
out here in the nature.
So
Cameras rolling.
Yeah,
yeah. So goose interruption.
yeah. away from the goose. So let me talk about the category for a minute, because I think this is a really important point as well. So, you know, Karma, it was organic, fair trade. You know, if you're going to have a soda, it's a better soda alternative for you. You know, because you're then, you know, contributing back to a foundation that, you know, helps empower and educate girls, and you know, in West Africa, and you know, there's a purpose behind the brand. Calafia Farms, it was meeting an unmet consumer needs.
Yeah,
you know, so Liquid Death, we were a commoditized product, water, that we were trying to premiumize in a new format in a can. And then it was flavored water, which was a bit like a soda alternative, but with no functionality. So actually in those early days, it was just pure brand sell. Yep. We just had to sell on brand because we didn't have any data to like really back up why you would list Liquid Death anywhere.
And then at the beginning they were getting, I remember speaking to like the early days, like the guys, like when they were talking about that, and they would just get laughed out of bars.
Yeah.
And like no one is going to stock your water that looks like a beer can.
Yeah.
In a pub or a bar.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
And pay a fortune for it as well. Yeah. So I think the role a brand plays in category, I think, is really important. And I think we had to do a brand self like time and time again.
Yeah.
And I think one of the learnings there is actually we needed to just have a tighter category proposition, I think. And it's not to say that we didn't have any category proposition, but I just think that if you look at where the beverage category is going now, it's talking about, you know, functionality. You've still got your big core categories like carbonates are huge, you know, water is huge. But if you have a look at like, you know, you've got, you know, soft drinks, you know, carbs, juice, you know, etc. And actually the ones that are growing, well, actually at the top of that is functionality. And it's getting more space with retailers, and certainly in the UK. And brands are combining this like creativity, brand purpose and mission, with like category needs, setting the business up operationally for success and funding it correctly, and but they're actually trying to meet a consumer need, a category, provide a solution to that problem. We were trying to premiumize, a commoditized category, which had a benefit because you're taking, PET out of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
But it's so commoditized, it's very challenging to get that step up. So, but I think the stat, was it 2 million RSV in year one or whatever, which most brands, I think, as they launch would probably take. It's an incredible achievement.
It's amazing. And then we got it everywhere, right? And
that was outside of, that was outside of the channels that are unmeasured. The amount of volume that we were putting through, festivals, on trades, events was totally different, and in other markets. So, lots of success there. But I think just tightening up that category proposition, I think, is quite important. Whichever category you
go into.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And I mean, there was so much talk, I guess, because of the hype of all the marketing and the content and the campaigns. Fact that it was water in a can at the end of the day. Every single person in, say, the LinkedIn marketing sphere had an opinion about why they did exit international and the UK.
Yeah.
Now that I guess the dust has settled a little bit, I mean, in your opinion, what were the sort of, what are your thoughts about that exit?
Well, I think, listen, incredible brand, and I think strategically, given what was happening in the background, I think it was the right decision, for various reasons, that some of which we can't, quite tricky to go into.
Yeah.
But I think, if your domestic market is, needing to perform at a certain rate and level and certain metrics across the total organisation, and it's not where you need it to be, actually refocusing strategically on that makes total sense. So I think strategically the right decision. Tricky for people like you and I, because we've spent so much time building, creating, navigating, putting all this infrastructure in place, and then it's a decision is made to move on. But that's business. Business, you have to pivot and change with what you do, and so many brands, don't do that. And to Liquid Death's credit, I think they pivot and change what they do quite consistently, and it works incredibly well. So. It was entertaining. At that point, I had finished at Liquid Death before any of the announcement had come out, so I wasn't part of any of the communications team, making that announcement. So I sort of sat there with a popcorn, just.
So I don't think any of us were, right? On that international side,
just watching these comms come through, and like you say, everybody had an opinion. I've never seen somewhere like a platform like LinkedIn blow up quite so much.
So many experts out there, right?
So many of you. So
what are they talking about?
Yeah, but I think with you're entitled to have an opinion.
Yeah.
I think that's totally fine. Ideally it's an informed, not an ill-informed opinion, because then it adds credibility to that. But I think because maybe some of the communications weren't as proactive, and it was such a meteoric rise with Liquid Death, and then suddenly we're exiting international, and some of the views in there was just around the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
I think my guess is people just didn't believe it. They were just like, well, I'm calling bullshit. What's happening here? So then everybody was diving into different reasons and theories and, all this sort of stuff. And some people were definitely on point, and then there were others that were just so wildly off. And but I think the lesson there, and I think it's an important one, is just around what's your clear communication strategy if you are entering into a market or choosing to exit a market, and just being really, really clear with those comms, and being believable, and I think it's important, and people want to learn, people want to know what's worked and what hasn't worked, and that's why from a brand perspective, everyone had an opinion, because it was working so incredibly well. And so when you see something like that, people just go, well, it's obviously just not worked, which I don't think was the case at all. I don't think Liquid Death was not working. It was just in its infancy.
And it was. I mean, it was sort of 18 months. If you think about other brands that have launched in that time period, have they got into most of the retailers in the country?
Yeah.
All those sort of things. It's sort of, it doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah. And we had national on that. We had national listings in multiple markets and multiple grocers, didn't we? In so many different markets. In the UK, we were in Tesco, and we had 2 other major retailers lined up. So we were building that momentum and growing that awareness and doing lots of things within the world that we could operate in, within our controllables. But going back to it, I think strategically, it's the right call for Liquid Death. And you've got brands like Poppy that have just gone through, an exit in the US, and they never left the US market, and they sold, what was it?
I think 1.9 billion or
1.5 billion, or whatever it was. It just a phenomenal amount without needing to leave the domestic market. And that's an interesting branded proposition, because some of the claims that you can make, in that particular market from a regulatory perspective, you can't make in other markets. So they made a decision to stay in that market and grow brand and build distribution and continue to go. Mm-hmm. I think that, I think one of the bits that Liquid Death, I think in some of the comms that they announced, it was like, it's a momentary, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but like, we'll be back. And I think that's an interesting topic for people to consider when they are expanding any brand in any category.
If they can do that, right?
If they can do that. Yeah. So, do you have the right to, go into a market and then go, right, actually, we're now going to come out of this market for all the right reasons that work for our business, and then we go, and now we'll go back into it. Mm-hmm. I've not seen many brands do it successfully, and the level of cost, that goes into doing that brand build to then come back out to then get back in. There's a lot of cost that goes
into
it.
The public opinion, right, as well. Be like, hey, we're back now.
But I think with the public opinion, I think it was more trade opinion. I think it's probably the consumer appeal. I mean, how many times do we get stopped and people are like, Liquid Death, I love Liquid Death, man. Like they loved it. So like the core advocates, the core fans,
they'd still be there.
Yeah. They'd absolutely love it. And so I think the opportunity for any brand to do that is sound. But like making sure that you do that and you take the lessons and the learnings from previous time to put it in this time, that I think that's the key bit. And those some of the things that you reflect on as a managing director of a international business when the perception is it's not worked. That's quite a painful place to be as well. So you do a lot of self-reflection and you go, could I have done things differently? Could I have done things better? And like the answer inevitably is always yes. Like, of course there is.
And what do you think like the main lessons learned are, and what are those things that say if you were going to do it again?
Yeah, I think the main lessons, I think expectations around what we can deliver over a time period. I think just try and level set some of those. So we always spoke about like that kind of 20 million mark being the mark that we needed to get.
That was like the benchmark, right?
Yeah, and to get to quite quickly. I think the reality of you take somewhere like the UK, it's longer to do that brand build. So I think maybe just level setting some of those expectations a bit earlier. Mm-hmm. I think.
Do you reckon that's because of it, like the British or like the psyche, where it would be like they're more sceptical of it, or
we're a bit more cynical, the Brits, aren't we?
Just a little bit.
Yeah, we're a bit more like don't trust you yet.
Yeah.
So, and a bit more sarcastic in tone.
Yeah.
And actually, so just on that sarcasm, so you take like the brash humour of a brand like Liquid Death versus the sarcasm and the wit of a this sweeping generalisations, but of a Brit, localizing some of the messaging and the comms to appeal to that may have more cut through in a brand like Liquid Death versus the kind of more brash shouty in your face style marketing, but that also then might not work in Australia where it was working incredibly well. So I think it's just, where do you localize content and where do you be creative within the markets that you're really going to focus on to make that work as well. I think there's definitely some personal life lessons that I went through during that period of time, and we worked together, and it was a roller coaster of a time personally during that period of time, and that kind of have an impact professionally as well. And so you reflect on those things and you try and learn and move on from those things, and that was those are just some things that you just make sure you get right next time around. And then I think one of the biggest that was quoted, I think, was just around the supply chain. I think one of the areas,
And forecasting and things like that, you mean? Or
Yeah. So you referenced it earlier about the team with some amazing US counterparts that came over, didn't we? Who, when we initially launched, and I think they found actually to sell quite hard on liquid death, and it was definitely tougher in those earlier days when people didn't really get it. And I remember pitching to Tesco at the time at London Coffee Festival, and the senior buyer at the time, and trying to explain the proposition of the brand, and it took a bit of time because most people like it's a beer or an energy drink.
Yeah.
So you're then trying to like dispel those myths and explain what you're about. But the beauty and the genius behind that is people were talking about it because they didn't understand what it was. And if you're not paying for people to talk about your brand, you're winning.
Yeah.
You're doing the right thing. So, but I just think being a bit clearer on some of those things, and then the supply chain. You take Calafia as an example. We were manufacturing in the US to start off with. Brought that brand,
and then shipping.
Yeah, and then shipping. Okay. Yeah, and then bringing that brand into the UK. So you're not making money to start off with. That's fairly normal in a brand new brand launch. But then what you need to do is commercialize the business over the time. Yeah. So we'd localized the manufacturing, and we brought new product innovation in with higher margins with localized manufacturing. Mm-hmm. Like liquid death, if they choose to come back to the markets that were working well, local manufacturing is going to be critical. It's a really important thing, and not overproducing product or not having enough products, getting some of those things is really important to get right as well.
Yeah. So if you were to, I guess, summarize like those lessons learned from liquid death,
yep,
what would it be?
Yeah. I'll do a few that are really strong, and then ones that I think are just valuable lessons for other people to learn from. So I think like cut through in brand and creativity is just next level, insane. Really, really strong, positive content that works incredibly well and grew awareness of brand rapidly. So, and that thumb-stopping content through social media, just unreal. I think the team, people, delivery, you get the right people around you, it makes a huge difference. And so I'm really proud of lots of the work that we did there. The partnerships that we had, Live Nation, Metallica, our relationship with Amazon, there's lots of distributors, agencies, just so many strong partnerships that help outside of that, just that executional delivery.
Yeah.
And then flip it on its head, what are some of the other things that you could really learn from? I think supply chain and infrastructure, longer term planning, I think needs to be, put in place there to commercialize the business over time. I think having the right to do international with your domestic market performance being where you want it to be. And that's not just a liquid death, that's a really...
It's just a general...
I think so, I think so. I think the localization of content, so making sure that the relevance has cut through is really important. Mm-hmm. And the audience that you're really targeting as you go into these different markets, with you're meeting consumer and category need, but you're also talking to that audience consistently and in the right spaces where they are all the time. And I think that makes a huge difference. And it sounds this one's going to sound really, really obvious, but just don't assume every market is the same. There's
nuances in everything, right?
There's nuances in everything, regulatory, infrastructure, political, macro. There's wherever you look, it's different. How retailers operate, you name it, is different.
Yeah.
So I think just making sure that you don't go broad brush. This will work because it's worked here. You go, actually, let's take the best bits of this. What's relevant here? And then let's apply it there, and then tailor, tweak, amend, test, learn, and keep going as well. So, but there's listen, if I take a look back at that time, it's still one of the best brands in the world right now, doing some absolutely phenomenal and incredible things. And I love my time there. I think you loved your time there. We both look back at it incredibly fondly, and I only wish all of them and the brand all the absolute best, that it continues to go and achieve its goals as well.
Yeah.
So, and I was incredibly proud to be part of that journey, and we delivered some incredible things, and we learned some pretty valuable lessons through that process as well. And That sounds a bit like life,
Yeah. That's it. I'm like, it felt like it went so quickly because we were doing so much. There were so many fun times, I think, and then like having like what you were saying about having the right team in place, that's really important.
Yeah.
And sort of having that cultural fit within the team, and now kind of taking us up to where we are today.
Yeah.
I'd love to get into Uncharted Territory, and why did you want to kind of set out and do your own thing? Like, well, like now, and especially sort of like after 2 decades within drinks.
Yeah. So why did I want to do Uncharted Territory? I think I was doing it before Uncharted Territory was born in reality. So I get asked to do advisory pieces of work, and I've worked in the packaging industry, how would a business or an M&A. I worked in the paint industry for a period of time. I've worked in retail, and I've worked in beverages, and so I've worked in these different industries doing a range of different projects for different brands. And I was like, I keep getting asked to do all this work all the time because of the experience that I've got across such a broad spectrum. So I was like, right, how do I take all of these things that I've learned over this 2 decades and actually try and put that into a services proposition that can help brands? And like I love good brands, and I want good brands to be successful, and like I want them to do really well. So I was like, all right, okay, how do I take all this and put it together? So and then even coming up with a name, and it's so important if you're going to be in the brand world that you think about your own brand really carefully. So Uncharted Territory, like I was looking, if you look at brands, they're normally going into waters that they don't know, and they're going into uncharted spaces, and you don't know what you don't know. It's new territories and geographies and regions and channels and market, and so I was like, okay, there's something in pulling these elements together so that the name represents what we're going to try and do as an agency to help these brands be successful as they head into this uncharted territory. So I was like, okay, got there with a name. And then it was like, okay, what's the look and feel and design and the color palettes, and even in all of our language and comms that we use, we talk about crew, mapping, charts, navigating. We're very selective with the language that we use to represent what we're talking about as well. And the logo design, and I mean, I was so meticulous with everything when we were first starting to make sure that as a services branded proposition, we were on point. And I'm really proud of where we've got to with that as well. And then I've sort of bucketed it into 4 areas. It was like, okay, so there's like leadership and advice, and there's kind of non-exec advisory roles and board roles that I get asked to do pretty frequently. And it was like, okay, so that's sort of one pillar of what we can offer as a service. And it's incredibly successful, and we're working with some fantastic brands in that space as well. And I've got to say, I personally love it. It's really nice helping like energetic, positive founders that are passionate about what they're doing, and like using the experience that you've got to just try and like guide and navigate and just make sure that they're setting themselves up for success with what they're doing. And it's incredibly valuable. And I'll talk about some of the brands, in a second. The second area is more your area really, but it was like, brand development, comms, tone of voice, brand positioning, lifestyle marketing. How do you get brands into like the core audiences that you're trying to appeal to, and what's the right way of doing that? And actually, there's a lot of strategy and psychology and theory that goes into getting that to the right place, and then it's actually executing that as well. And I'm always amazed at how little thinking sometimes can go into some of those things. I think so having that as a proposition that we can support with, and I'll pick your brains on it in a second. So that's like the second area. The third area is around like growth, really. It's like growth and expansion. So how do you take a branded proposition and like where do you go? Like which channels, which markets, what's the commercial strategy, what products should you go with, price points. It's is the category big enough? Like it's everything from like mapping through to execution again, and sort of everything in between. And sort of this last one is more sort of, I think we're getting asked to do more and more of it now, but it's like the fractional support for teams.
Yeah.
So they want to. It's the economies are tight, salaries cost a fortune. There's a cost of living crisis everywhere, and it's just really expensive building out big teams, and it involves a lot of capital. So actually, is there a way that businesses can use all of this experience that people have got, that pay a fraction of the cost, but get almost the same level of output,
and tap into all these different areas as well, right?
And tap into all these different areas, yeah. So we've got some great brands that we do fractional support across all of those things, and it's super invaluable for them because it's helping them grow, take all these learnings, progress across a range of different things, and it's really rewarding as well. And again, we're just in our infancy, but we've got to a point where we were like, well, okay, let's not take on any more brands for a second, because it was like it's been busy. It's been pretty busy. So, and then what we wanted to do was just make sure that, like, as that Unchartered Territory proposition, we operate across multiple categories as well. Mm-hmm. So actually, one of the brands that we work on that I personally absolutely love at the moment is a brand called Maya. And it's a new era for mothers, personal care brand, and it's everything from like fertility, pregnancy, post-pregnancy, and through. And they've got serums and creams and all sorts. And the thing that appeals to me about that is I've got 3 children, and when you see someone go through, having children, and you look at things like loss of identity, or the identity becomes mum, and actually, it shouldn't just, you're not just a mum. And actually what they're trying to carve out and stand for is more than just the product that they're just delivering. So actually helping these founders who are just incredibly inspiring human people, and get that part right. And it's everything from like infrastructure, operations, financing, through to like brand, content, comms, execution, like literally end to end. And I'm absolutely loving it. And, it's a totally new category. I do not know that category well enough, other than seeing like people that I care about go through and have those experiences. And, we've got sort of a protein based brand, which is actually like functionality, in food, which actually is, an incredibly important part of having a balanced diet. And how do you take that and apply that to different markets? Mm-hmm. We've got a brand that is funnily enough, a canned water, proposition, but actually, what they're doing and the services that we work with them on, actually, they're really looking at such a targeted audience, and it's got a co-founder that's a celebrity, and the incredible team of people, and we're there helping them with expanding into UAE and getting their domestic market right first and foremost, and we're helping them with the US and partnerships and lifestyle marketing, and there's a range of different things that we're helping them with, and it's
and they've got purpose as well, right? Which is around sustainability, totally, and that's kind of like looking at all these brands. I mean, I'd say there is a bit of a crossover between that. They've all got there's purpose there with all of them. It's not just like, okay, well, going to create a brand and going to try and monetize it. It's kind of it's something a bit deeper than that as well, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then like we work in the alcohol category, as well. But actually, it's one of the propositions is around non-alcoholic, great tasting beverages, which is an alternative to alcohol replacement as well. And it's like having this like breadth of brands and breadth of channels and experiences. It's just, it's really rewarding and it's really refreshing. And like I love it. I really enjoy it.
Sick, man. Yeah. And like looking for Uncharted Territory and brands. Say if people are starting new brands or if they're involved in startups, from all the experiences and all the takeaways that you have, what would you say is like some of the key things for brands to be aware of if you're going to be launching either a new product or a new company?
Yeah. That's a big question.
It's loaded.
Yeah. I think so. We're helping some early stage startup brands at the moment. I think the ones that are doing it really well are the ones that are taking the time to really understand what's the proposition that they're creating for meeting the consumer need in the category, but why they're different to what's going in that category already, and they're taking time to actually really formulate that before just launching a product or a brand. And it's so critical, and ultimately it's probably going to change because business, everything changes over time. But taking time to get that bit right, I think, is really important. I think the like operational infrastructure of how it's going to happen is really important. So supply chains, it's capital raising and investment to fund it. Is it bootstrapped? Is it angel investment? Is it something a bit more strategic? And cash is tight at the moment, and people are quite wary with spending money. At a macro level, that's no different with investors. So actually making sure that you're really clear when you're talking to investors what your proposition is and what they're going to get in return for that over a course of time is really important. So that needs to be really on point, and how you're going to commercialize that business over time as well. So as brand and operations and infrastructure, I think then it's more like, as you sort of go through that, it's okay, how do we deliver this? Like, what is the right way? What's the mechanism to deliver this? And if I was going to start a brand right now outside of an agency, I'd be looking at what's the direct to consumer proposition, so I can really understand my customers incredibly well. Get direct feedback rather than having to go through like a wholesaler or a retailer where you're one step removed. And I think the brands that are building that direct connection with the end customer is really important, because customers aren't afraid of giving you that feedback. So I think that's just a really important consideration, because you can do that in some markets, but not in other markets. And the infrastructure that you put in place in order to do that, and the feedback loop so that you can continue to progress and evolve, I think is really important as well. So that kind of initial launch phase, it is, I think the lessons that you can learn in there can inform what you do going forwards as well.
And then after that initial launch, when brands want to go into new markets, say either if it's a US brand going over to the UK or Europe or other parts of the world, or the opposite, like European brands going over to the US, what do you think they should be thinking about first, and what kind of like strategy should they be kind of putting in place?
Well, we use a process, don't we, that we go through with the brands that look to do that. So we talk about sort of mapping smart strategies. So it's how big is the category? What's the right pack format? So your traditional 4 Ps of marketing, but we go through that process end to end to a point where we sort of navigate these brands through it, so that actually all of the thinking and the strategy is put in place up front, so that when they do go into that market, like, it's got the best possible chance. Because I think the stat is 9 of 10 brands or 8 of 10 brands fail. So, which is great, because I love the fact that 10 out of 10 people give it a crack and give it a shot, because there's plenty of people that don't. But the reality is lots of those brands fail. So the upfront part to get it right, I just think is so important. And then that's when using that experience that other people have got to help inform that. And I encourage the people that we work with not just to talk to us. I'm like, go and talk to other people, like peers, other brands, other industries, go and get different feedback from different people, because someone has something else to bring to the party each time. So,
and get honest feedback as well, right? Yeah. And like, not just sort of people saying yes. Or,
we go to friends and family, and like, they're more like,
"It's great."
Yeah. Perfect, nailed it. Yeah, we're away. Or like, that tastes great, that looks brilliant. And you're like, right, okay, maybe I'll go and talk to someone who doesn't know me, has no emotional connection, who's not afraid of, and I give them permission to give me that honest feedback. I might not agree with them, but it gives me a different thought process ahead of launching something new as well. So, but that process that we take our brands through, I think is invaluable, and it's working really, really well so far. I'm proud of the work that we're doing there. Yeah.
And if people want to get in touch, or if they want to find out more, what's the best way?
The usual stuff, really, like, email, phone, social, LinkedIn, that sort of stuff. But there's plenty of us, and the team is growing and expanding at rapid rates as well. And we're offering more and more, I guess, as time goes forward. But that's where, Ollie, my friend, you are going to be picking up, like,
and going into different regions as well, which is exciting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Nice.
Obviously you co-founded Unchartered Territory, so let's flip it on its head for a second then. So, like, what are you excited about with what we're going to go and do? And
I guess growing the brands is super, like, that's my area, what I find interesting. And sort of taking something that is just a concept whether that's like a new partnership, it could be as simple as like doing an event, and then amplifying that and just like doing something that's fun and making content that people enjoy. It doesn't necessarily have to kind of go down the humor and the funny route, but you know, if it sort of feels that you're getting that messaging and you're getting across to the right audience and not trying to kind of please everybody, which is just impossible. It's like identifying those communities, drilling down into them, and then like telling a cool story that resonates with that audience.
Yeah.
And there's so many like things that we're kind of like working on now that like has a lot of those elements in it, and that's super fun to be a part of.
Yeah, okay. And one of the things that you and I talk about quite a lot is like brands that play it safe. And what's your
I got a bit of a thing about this. So everyone, I know, I mean, kind of going back to what Liquid Death did, everyone kind of goes and sort of uses that as the poster child of what you should do for being disruptive, or they look at other brands who've kind of done something similar. I guess traditionally it was always like products that were bad for you, right? Sweets, alcohol. They're like, okay, we want to do something that, you know, like that everyone isn't doing. We don't want to copy anyone. We want to do our own thing. And when you have these conversations and they'll be like, oh, that would be great, but we can't do that. And we're like, well, why can't you do that? Because there's reservation of that pleasing thing. Okay, everyone's got to be okay with it. But if you're trying to please everybody, it just becomes vanilla. And then it could be considered boring. And if it's not going to cut through the noise, the whole thing is like in today's like branding or like marketing world, you're looking at like, how are you going to break through? How are you going to cut through the noise? And if you're playing it safe, that doesn't happen. So take risks. If like obviously conceptualize the idea if you have one. Some of these ideas are crazy and you probably don't want to like launch it, you know, into the market. But ones that you think, you know, like do a bit of testing, whether that's friends, family, random strangers. What do you think of this idea on the train kind of thing? You can have these conversations. And if you think, you know, like I know instantly if someone says something to me, if a brand says something to me, whether it's marketing team, sales, finance, whatever it is, if they say something and they go, what about this as an idea? If I smirk straight away, then like for me personally, I think it works. If they say something, I'm like, meh. If it's that kind of, yeah, it's okay. Maybe it's not a good idea to launch it.
Yeah.
But if it kind of like, if you get that light bulb or like if you start laughing straight away when someone says something, if they want to do something, kind of go with that gut feel, but also go with a bit of testing. Don't just fly blindly into things too.
Yeah. You now realise everyone knows one of your tells now. Any client we ever work with, you have a little smirk and they'll be like, nailed it.
Exactly.
Every time.
My lip goes.
Yeah, he's got it.
That's a good one. So that would definitely be something that I'd look for.
Yeah, okay. And then in terms of like Uncharted Territory in this podcast, it's obviously our first episode.
Yeah.
And we wanted to talk through some stuff and kick it off. Like, where are you going to take the Uncharted Territory podcast? And
so the podcast is super exciting. I mean, we're like looking at speaking to brands that are doing things differently. So this episode, like this is like our opening episode to basically set the scene, who we are, where we've come from, and what we're doing with Uncharted, and then just talking to not just drinks brands, but different brands within lifestyle brands that are doing cool things.
Yeah.
Is sort of whether that's with the founders, could be potentially be with celebrity founders, but yeah, looking at people that are telling interesting stories, but more importantly, why are they building the brands, how it relates to them, why they're doing it is the main reason, and why they want to get it out in the world.
Yeah, and that storytelling part is so important. We didn't really touch upon it too much during that episode, but like great brands that tell good stories and bring them to life in ways that are creative, you know. And I think for you and I, we both like hate boring brands that play it safe.
Yeah.
I remember a brand asking me to, you know, create a brand and a product that was for like Gen Z, male, female, millennials and make it look a certain way that fitted into the same as what everyone else. And I was just like, it's just another brand. It's just another brand with no purpose, meaning, reason, or anything. And it's like I think if we can find those brands and talk to these people that have created these brands and the secret sauce and go, there's some incredible learnings here around that people can take. And if they genuinely want to go and create something exceptional, I think there's a really good opportunity in that space.
Yeah.
And that's like, you and I just find it interesting, and when you're finding it interesting and you're engaged and empowered, like, work is just, it's not work, is it?
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
Exactly. And if it's sort of something that, like, it's got to be like with the founders and the people that are working with these brands, if they get up and they feel that purpose and they feel that drive and they get up every day thinking like, okay, obviously everyone's going to have, bad days, that's just life, right? But if you feel that, then that's when okay, like, working with this brand or your own company, that's something, if that's going to excite you and get you up every day when you're having those crappy days, that's like, ideally that's what you want. And everyone can kind of, you just be going through the motions, and it's those tough times where you think, okay, like, this is why I'm doing it. And when it's good, everyone's having a great time, right? But when it's not, that's when you got to, like, you put in a bit more. And if it's something that you really enjoy working on, whether that's a product or a service, that's key, I think.
Yeah, nice. Okay. And I guess the beauty of this is we started together as work colleagues, didn't we, and peers, and have become mates over time as well. And now we've co-founded Unchartered Territory. And the beauty of doing that with people you respect and enjoy working with, it's like the level of enjoyment is huge.
Yeah.
Part of that also means that when you've co-founded a business and you're doing a podcast and you're in Portugal, also means that we can go for a surf afterwards.
Exactly.
So, like,
there's got to be perks.
There's got to be perks to it.
Yeah. Nice one. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks, Barry.
Thanks for coming on it.